Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Take Back My Brain. I have a very exciting guest today. I have Robert Scott Bell on with me today. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks, Lori. The name "Take Back My Brain" is like, I wonder if I left it behind somewhere. I hope it's here with me today. We'll see, and we'll do the best we can.
I love it. Well, you're a doctor of homeopathic. You've been doing that a long time. You're also an author. You have the Robert Scott Bell Show, and you are constantly fighting for medical freedom in this country. So thank you so much for all that you do. And I would love to know, how did you get to where you are today? Did you, like, as a teenager, did you say, I'm going to fight for medical freedom? And you ended up a homeopathic, and here you are.
Yeah, that would be a fun thing if I had that. I only
Right.
knew that I would grow up to be a doctor, but the only model for doctoring I had was allopathic medicine. My uncle was a doctor. My dad was in the pharmaceutical industry. But because I was sick from year zero, I was chronically ill and always treated with drugs and shots and
Yeah.
surgery that, I just never had a thought that I'd be fighting for medical freedom. I mean, you grow up in America and you think freedom, yay, but we had a pretty idyllic life. If you know Gen Xers, we got to do some things, see some things, and
Exactly.
it was kind of an interesting upbringing compared to what we see today. So I don't know that we thought we were going to take on the world for something this big, but it happened, honestly, because of my own journey back to health or, finding my way to out of the chronic disease mess I was in. I was the canary of the coal mine of what would be
Yeah.
commonplace in the succeeding generations, the millennials and Gen Zs as well. Chronic disease is just pretty much prevalent. Now we learn that what 4 out of every 10 adults has a non-alcoholic fatty liver disease.
Right.
More kids are chronically ill than not, and so I gone through that early on, I guess, as a testing ground, and probably to say, how bad do you really want to be well? And we're going to let you get sick and figure it out so that you can help others. And you don't know that going while you're going
You
through it,
don't know that
right?
while you're going through, you're
Yeah,
like, this sucks.
yeah.
And
And
yeah,
why am I
why is this
suffering this
happening
way?
to me? Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
was all, for great purpose. And that's the thing about you come to a spiritual realization that things don't happen to you, they happen for you.
Right.
And you're not a victim. You're an active participant. You might not be aware of how active you are in creating that reality that you live in this body. And yeah, my parents were ignorant of a lot of these things, so I don't blame them. I'm not angry that I grew up on Count
Right.
Chocula and Frankenberry cereal,
I know,
but
me too.
we had to figure it out. And then, when I did and I started getting well, you become initially like a religious zealot. You can't wait to tell everybody, my gosh, the food is poison and you
Yeah.
got to detoxify your liver. And people would look at you and go, well, we used to like you, but get away.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah. You're
so,
the weird person around here now.
right. But, they knew that I had all these ailments and illnesses and allergies and things. So there was some credibility as I was overcoming those things. And I recognized I couldn't be quiet about it because I had to tell my fellow Americans how much we had been deceived.
Yeah.
Yet, it's not something you can typically do in polite company because they're just like, I don't want to hear that. Why are you bringing that up? So I thought about talk radio,
Yeah.
and
Why not?
I was interviewed in 1994 on a station in Atlanta that doesn't turn on down its power at night. So we were going all over the country with a talk show, and the switchboard was lit up for 4 hours. People outraged about the things that we were talking about, and yet some were enthusiastic about it. But it really, in 1994, when I talked about vaccines being dangerous and there are a
Yeah.
myriad of cures for cancer that are not in your oncologist's office, and that HIV doesn't cause AIDS. You can imagine the outrage people were experiencing
Well,
then.
I still think they do. They're still outraged by that, but it is becoming a little more, people are digging deeper, especially since the whole COVID debacle.
Yes, that is for sure. There has been a genuine change. In fact, I just covered a story out of Emory University, my alma mater, in the CDC, where they did a survey and they said almost 50% of new parents to be with their first child are not sure that they're going to do any vaccines.
Right?
50%. Think about
50%.
that.
That's
Yeah, when I
fantastic.
started this in my show in 99 officially, maybe 1, 2, or 3% had a question about one or a few or all.
Yeah.
And of course, I woke up to that before I met my wife, and Then we got married and we had kids, and they've not had one vaccine. They've never even had an antibiotic. So we were able to
Hmm.
raise them in a way that a lot of people wish they knew, but you only know when you know. The question is then, will you do better? And try not
Right.
to be too hard on yourself, because I didn't know what I knew until I knew it. And then I have an obligation now. Do I do the same thing I always did now that I know it's bad? That's not cool. Or do I
Yeah.
go, now I'm not doing that again? And so the opportunity to change at this moment is the opportunity to take.
Yeah, absolutely. I know when I was a single mom with my son, and I waited until he was 14 months old before he had his first shot, and that was only because I'd gotten threatened,
Yeah.
with like DHS and things like that. And that was a hard decision, and one that I never wanted to make.
Yeah.
But you get yourself in a, kind of get put in a pickle there. So, but we detoxed him and he's fine, you know.
Good, good.
But
How old
he's
is he
never had
now?
he's 26. He never had an
Oh,
antibiotic either. My daughter's never had an antibiotic.
nice. I
So,
love it.
yeah, yeah,
I have
she
to
never
get the
had any
kids together.
vaccines.
My
Yeah.
son is 25, almost 26, and my daughter's just turned 20. And I like to connect them with the Gen Zers of their age group that are aware of these things. And
Yep.
unfortunately, a lot of them were not still. I know that my daughter had some problems when some of her friends got the COVID shot during her high
Oh,
school
yeah.
years, and she had issues with spreading and shedding kind of stuff because obviously
Yeah.
she didn't get the shot. So there were weird things that were occurring in that generation.
They for sure. Like my daughter's best friend, she got the shot and my daughter didn't, and she was so worried about her. And just, issues, female stuff
Sure.
and that kind of thing that
Yeah.
happened with that too. But it's crazy stuff. You talk so much about the history and how we've been lied to. I would love to unpack that a little bit for the audience,
Mhm.
in regards to, the pharmaceutical industry and the government's play in our health.
Yeah. Well, I've got a Substack, thersbshow.substack.com, and we've recently been turning my monologues into articles because I've been doing a
Nice.
lot of historical perspectives. And I know not everybody listens or watches, and a lot of people like to read. And I like to write, but I almost forgot because it's just been so consuming to do this show 2+ hours a day, 5 days a week live, and a
Right.
six pre-record on Sunday for more spiritual discussions. But the written history I didn't know. I did we lost oral traditions in this country. We were so new and young and
Mm-hmm.
enamored in the 20th century with technology. We embraced better living through synthetic chemistry and assumed that modern medicine was the only medicine for most of us all of our lives because we were born into it,
Right.
not realizing the entire history of medicine in America was rooted in, herbalism and homeopathy
Right.
and then naturopathy and other things that eventually chiropractic even. And that's something I wasn't aware of going up and growing into that medical mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to go back and learn in the history books that weren't written officially for our schools, but that were written that were not censored or sponsored by Pfizer, for instance. And
Right.
uh, the series of 6 volumes called Divided Legacy is almost overwhelming. But if you really want to know about the medical history of America, the schism between homeopathy and what was called allopathic medicine, that was a big part of the journey as to how come in the 20th century we pretty much, unless you were in a weird family, all you knew was aspirin and antibiotics, you
Yep.
know, and
Yeah.
some vaccines. So that wasn't by accident. In 1844, the American Institute of Homeopathy was founded, and 2.5, 3 years later, the American Medical Association was founded in 1847. And we all knew about AMA, right? There, AMA,
Right.
that's the
Right.
legitimate science and medicine. And they were founded with the express intent and purpose to wipe out their primary competition at the time, homeopathy. They didn't
Really.
succeed initially because, homeopathy was very popular. It was inexpensive, and a lot of doctors picked it up coming over from Germany. It became a mainstay of medicine in America. In fact, I grew up in Georgia for much of my young life, impressionable years, and went to high school. And we would visit Civil War museums, and you'd see all
Mm-hmm.
kinds of things like that. And at the time, I knew nothing of what I was looking at. And then as I one day learned of homeopathy, by the time I was 24 years of age, that's when I
Uh-huh.
first met a homeopathic doctor and began
Wow.
my journey to healing. And I went back to those Civil War museums, and I was stunned to look deeper into those medical field kits. They all contained homeopathic medicines. I'm like,
Wow.
I'm like, what? The whole, I mean, you erased the history of medicine. I didn't even know. And so that kind of thing is amazing to me to consider that if you are able to write the history books, you can put anything in there and
You
people
can
won't
erase, you
know.
can add,
You
you can
can
do anything
erase
you
and that.
want.
Yeah. And so I realized that they whitewashed history for the sake of modern medicine, or what would become modern pharmaceutical medicine, among other things. And you begin to question a lot of what we were taught or programmed in government indoctrination centers,
Right.
also known as public schools. And so that was another fascinating part of the journey. And as I, learned more about that history, then I learned of the Flexner Report of 1910, which was an interesting part of the early 20th century. It would completely turn the destiny of a modern medicine in America, and our health, in fact, because Abraham and Simon Flexner were hired by the Rockefeller and Carnegie Foundations. Rockefeller was the um, monopolist of oil-based monopoly.
Right.
And when he found out that you could synthesize oil through organic chemistry into all kinds of patent medicines, he wanted to control that market too. And
Mm-hmm.
they initiated a preordained commission report called the Flexner Report that basically said the only legitimate medicine that we're going to sanction in the schools have to teach, if to be accredited, patent petrochemical medicines, eventually approved by the FDA, and that anybody teaching anything but that would be, not accredited, not licensed, not funded. And then we're going to do a propaganda campaign to convince everybody that those other medicines are what they call quackery,
Right.
not real,
Right. And they've done a
which
good job at that.
Oh yeah, so we grew up in that environment, and I didn't even know about chiropractic till later, and when I heard about it, I was like, well, that's probably some kind of strange stuff because the
Right.
doctors all said so. Now it turns out that the AMA in the 20th century also targeted chiropractic for elimination, but in
Mm-hmm.
1976 there was a court case that went all the way up to the Supreme Court called Wilt versus AMA, and that was basically the Supreme Court had determined and validated, yeah, in fact, the AMA had colluded throughout the 20th century to eliminate chiropractic.
Oh,
And
wow. I
and
didn't even know
so
that.
yeah, so it was proven all the way up to the Supreme Court that they were engaged in unfair business practices in order to establishing a monopoly and making sure anybody that would dare compete for the healthcare dollar couldn't compete. And so that
Right.
was part of it. But through the 20th century, because of the Flexner Report, if you went to most prestigious medical schools, at the turn of that century, were homeopathic and naturopathic.
Mm-hmm.
The allopaths were like mercury and bloodletting. They weren't
Right.
that popular,
Right.
right?
Right.
Until the wonder drugs started coming out like aspirin, and then antibiotics. And, even homeopaths began to give up on homeopathy because this was like the fastest stuff ever, right? People had
Right.
pain, aspirin gone. Now, it was rooted in botanical medicine like white willow bark, right? The basis for
Mm-hmm.
aspirin. But antibiotics to kill infection, there were other things being used like silver and botanicals. Echinacea was something that was common in North America as an herb,
Right.
but it was given up on partly because of the economic pressures, right? The
Mm-hmm.
accreditation issues and all of that. And they almost succeeded in eliminating homeopathy from America as we approached the 1930s to the 1940s. And then there was something called the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938, passed in 1939. And this was going to establish, more regulations for medicine and health and all kinds of things. And in it, they were trying to eliminate homeopathy if it weren't for the heroic work of Copeland. This is Copeland's Cure. If you read the book by Natalie Robbins, it
Okay.
was Senator Copeland from Michigan. And he was a physician, a medical doctor, and a homeopath, and a senator. And he almost single-handedly saved homeopathy from extinction by
Wow.
getting the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act to grandfather the homeopathic pharmacopoeia. In other words, all the drug listed under the pharmacopoeia that we find in the various Materia Medica. And because of that, homeopathy was saved. Now, it was still relegated to alternative and it wasn't, lauded and whatever. But it was interesting, in the historical perspective, in the year 1900, okay,
Uh-huh.
1899 turns to 1900, there was a physician who was honored with a memorial at our nation's capital in Washington, D.C., at Scott Circle in Washington, D.C., an entire memorial to a physician.
Okay.
It's never happened before, never happened again. No other doctor has such a memorial in our nation's capital. Who was the doctor that was honored in 1900 with such a statue and a memorial?
I don't
Happened to
know.
be the founder of homeopathic medicine, Dr.
Mm,
Samuel Hahnemann. And it was
really?
such a big deal, Lori, that William McKinley, President McKinley, was there at its dedication.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'm like, who knew that? I didn't even hear of homeopathy in our nation's capital. The only doctor with that is a homeopath, the homeopath.
The homeopath? And now we
Yeah.
have
Think
Dr.
about,
Fauci? Really?
yeah, not Fauci. How amazing is that? The whole history of a medicine that was erased that we don't even know who this guy is. Of course, there's a medical school in Philadelphia named after Hahnemann, Hahnemann Medical School, but
Yep.
they don't teach homeopathy anymore. So through the years, the schools they wanted to be accredited and funded, so they dropped homeopathy from the curriculum. Where I went to school, Emory University in Atlanta, was one of the last holdouts of medical schools to teach homeopathy up until about 1949, I believe. And then
Uh-huh.
it was gone. So, the South, the Northerners looked down on the Southerners. Oh, those rubes still using homeopathy, but they were rebels, right? They
Right.
wanted their independence. So I credit that as a good thing, not a bad thing. But eventually it was wiped out there too. And so we lost a lot of history. We lost a lot of time, and we devolved into a fearful people of
We did.
germs, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
And we were taught the lies that vaccines eradicated infections and mortality and morbidity of all that, when it was really advances in sanitation, sewage, and hygiene. We talk about polio actually not being caused by one virus,
Right.
but DDT and other
Mm-hmm.
neurotoxins from the environment. And other well, the flu shot, the annual flu shot we grew up with, a flu shot every year. And, I learned of the flu shot primarily from the 1976 flu shot debacle under Gerald Ford. There was
Oh,
this flu, and they rushed a flu shot, and more people died from the flu shot than the flu. In fact, many people were injured and developed Guillain-Barré, a chronic neurological issue there as well.
right. Nobody talks about that.
Well, yeah, they immediately withdrew that shot and said, "Oh my gosh, this is bad." Now, if they were thinking clearly, they would have said there's something wrong with this entire paradigm, but they didn't. They retooled and brought it back out another way and pretended it didn't happen. But the whole idea goes back also to around World War One, the Spanish influenza of
Right.
1918, and they didn't know what caused it. They always thought of a germ caused it. But if you think about what was happening during World War One, you had abject poverty. You didn't have advanced sanitation, sewage, hygiene
No.
systems. We were in a warfare economy. Our soldiers were living in squalor conditions in Europe, in mud, and
Yeah.
horrible things were happening. And there was a genuine sickness because of the devastation to the environment at that time.
Right.
And yet, like 15 or so years after that event, the Spanish influenza, they dug up a dead guy in Alaska who apparently died at that time, like around 1918, of flu, or what they said was flu. And at that time, they had some advances in microscope technology. Electron microscopes came to be, and they dug him up and they saw what was in his body. They blew it up and they said, "Oh my gosh, look at this stuff. This is the stuff. This must have been the thing that killed everybody that we call Spanish flu." And then they said it was a virus. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, you can't make this up. This is how they came up with the story that they figured out it was a virus, an influenza virus, by digging up a dead guy in Alaska, one guy. And it was, I mean, I can't. Now, I will recommend to your viewers, if they haven't done so, one of my best friends in this lifetime. He's no longer with us. He's passed on, but his name, Liam Sheff. He wrote a book called Official Stories.
Mm-hmm.
Official Stories, subtext, subline. Official stories are there to protect the officials.
Right.
And there are numerous chapters that will upset your viewers. And if they have an open mind, they won't. They'll actually laugh. It's very humorous too, but it's also very pointed. And it talks about like absurdities like that, the history of vaccination, a
Right.
lot of things, including even evolution, and it'll take on Darwin and stuff. But it's and 9/11 and the Kennedy assassination, but done in a brilliant way. And I would say that's a book that if you really want to learn some of the things that we weren't taught, it brings it up in a contemporary way that's very enjoyable to read, even though it's outrageous too. So, as you ask me about these historical things, I just love being able to share it because I'm shortcutting, hopefully, for people, bits and pieces of history that were
Right.
lost to all of us. And once you start seeing the threads, you begin to say, I know how we got here.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, no one can dupe you, or it's not as easy to dupe you as to here's how we solved the problem. And you're like, that has nothing to do with how we actually got here. How is that going to solve the problem? But right now you go, well, okay, that sounds like a reasonable idea. Solve the problem, because you don't know how we got here. And
Right.
that's a dangerous ignorance to have. And we have been that for a long time. Case in point, our fear of germs that led to we have
Right.
a new virus that they actually engineered what it is. And that really wasn't the danger. It was what they caused us to do because we were afraid to roll up our sleeves and get a gene altering injection, right, with mRNA
Right.
technology. And that was all designed to bring that on. So, not knowing history, not knowing how to care for ourselves, not knowing why we get sick or why we're well, all of these things are vulnerabilities that are and were and will be exploited again to control us, to own us, to frighten us, to divide, separate, to be conquered, as we were partly, at least significantly, during the COVID crazy years we just came through. So we come to a contemporary thing in 2019, toward the latter part of Trump's first term. The FDA was not under Trump's control. There wasn't a Bobby Kennedy or a Macri, even though they're not
Right.
perfect, they're better. The FDA removed or suggested that they should remove the compliance policy guide 400.400. It's called CPG for homeopathy, which specifically it had carved out an exception for homeopathic drug products that they didn't have to go through a new drug application, an NDA, which can cost as much as $2 billion for new
Right.
drugs. And of course, the only reason anybody would invest that much is if they're pretty much guaranteed they're going to get approved and they have now patent protection to sell billions of dollars to profit even off of over beyond the 2 billion or whatever they had to invest to get it.
Right.
No one would do that for homeopathy because they're not patentable products. If you got approved, now anybody could, based on your investment, sell that product. You would never get your money. It's untenable. It's impossible. Big Pharma knows it, and that's why they said, hey, we can't overturn the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act and outlaw homeopathy, but we can make it really difficult. And so by withdrawing the CPG 400, which says this is how you market and sell and label and all of that, we can declare homeopathy illegal without overturning it by an act of Congress. And it was really fully implemented during COVID and Biden administration FDA. And yet
Mm-hmm.
here we are now with Trump back in office, Kennedy heading HHS with overseas FDA and McCary. I even got to ask Kennedy about that. I said, please look into this. Your FDA is basically making homeopathy illegal. And he says, I'll tell Macri or McCary, whatever.
Right.
He likes natural medicine, but so far, nothing. The
Nothing.
Alliance for Natural Health and Jonathan Emord has sued the FDA. They tried to get it dismissed summarily. They got 3 counts dismissed. One on safety is still to be litigated. But this could end today or tomorrow if Kennedy and Macri just said, we're not going to fight this. We're just going to re-implement CPG 400. It was no big deal. Nobody was dying. Nobody was getting hurt. Homeopathy is not unsafe,
Right.
especially compared to modern medicine, third leading cause of death. So we're right now in a battle of, can we influence the people that should and probably will or would do the right thing if they're aware of it? And so we're all working on that right now. We're working on a letter for everybody to sign on to get up there. And, this is something that's ongoing on my show. I bring this up and wrote
Right.
about in the Substack as well. So that's a long journey through history and certain highlights or lowlights, depending on how you look at it. And if we don't stand up to protect homeopathy, because I know the vast majority of people that are even natural and crunchy, they might not even use homeopathy. They use herbs and vitamins and stuff. Homeopathy, they sometimes say it's all homeopathic. It's not. But
Not.
suffice it to say, if you don't stand up for homeopathy, even if you don't use it, there'll be a time in the near future where the federal government or the FDA will come after something you do care about.
Mm-hmm. A
And
thousand percent.
that's the point I'm trying to make about Kirk Moore, the doctor
Yep.
who wrote fake vaccine cards for people needing to, work or whatever. And you might not agree with what he did, but eventually, doctor, you're going to find out that something the federal government mandates for you to do is going to be untenable for you. Because
Yeah.
you didn't stand up for that guy, there's no one to stand up for you. And so that's the point of it. It's about the principles of freedom and health freedom. And you said medical freedom. I'm fighting for medical doctors' freedom as well.
Right.
I'm not a medical doctor, but I want them to be free to innovate and really meet the needs of their patients so we can all work together collegially rather than saying monopoly and you guys don't belong. But that's a spiritual leap up of maturity when we don't need to operate a monopoly, because if you do, I'm just going to say it straight, you pretty much suck at what you do. If you can't operate outside of a monopoly, then you
Right.
can't compete. And that's what it's embarrassing if you're a doctor and you think you need that. If you think you're so great, then take on the homeopaths and the herbalists and the chiropractors and the naturopaths. And who does better? But if you're really a good healer, you're going to embrace all of these
Yeah.
forms of healing and work together to find out what's best in each case and instance. So it's a maturity I'm asking for that is not present in much of allopathic medicine at present.
Right. Can you dive into what exactly homeopathy is? I think maybe some of the listeners, like you said, they kind of lump it into
Yeah.
it's all the herbs, it's all this, it's just all homeopathic. And
Mhm.
that's not true. So could you define that a
Yeah.
little bit for us?
Yeah, it's a specific designation to a type of medicine that was developed in the late 18th century by Dr. Samuel Hahnemann into the early 19th century. He was a physician, medical doctor of his day, and he also was very intelligent. He spoke many languages and wrote many languages, and he was also translating medical texts from different languages. And he began to see patterns emerge in these things, and he was very observant in that regard. He also was not a big fan of bloodletting and leeches and mercury, right? And he said, that the things we use as medicines or as remedies for our patients are often more dangerous than the diseases they come to us
Right.
with. And that hasn't changed much, as we say in 21st century modern medicine. You're just as likely to die from the treatment as the disease. More
Mm-hmm.
people die
Mm-hmm.
from the treatment for cancer than cancer.
Right.
So in his day, he was quite ahead of his time, but he wanted to find a way to help people because he was a dedicated healer. And he observed certain things in nature, repetitive things, patterns. And one is what we now know of as the law of similars,
Mm-hmm.
and like cures like. So, in other words, he found that substances in the natural world, you could ingest them or be exposed in some way in its mother state to excess, perhaps, would cause a certain set or series of symptoms that were very detailed. You can determine them either through poisoning references or what he developed called the provings, where you would
Right.
actually test these substances on healthy subjects to see what symptoms would arise. And these were actually the first double-blind studies, in fact, coming out of homeopathy, not allopathic medicine. And he identified, for one, the first official homeopathic remedy is known as cinchona or china. It's the bark from the quinine. You've heard of quinine,
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah.
quinolones. And he found that if you ingested that tincture from the bark, you would create fever symptoms. And those symptoms would mimic a lot of different things, including malaria. Now, of course,
Mm.
in those equatorial regions, people had been ingesting the tinctures for years to prevent malaria. But he found that if you took it enough or too much, it would cause symptoms that mimicked malaria. And
Gotcha.
so at that moment, by diluting the tincture, the substance, but even more than that, between each step or stage of dilution, he would succuss, vigorously shake the remedy. And this is called succussion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you would end up diluting something that would cause problems or symptoms or even poisoning or even death. And now you were diluting it so it was no longer toxic, but in between each step of dilution, it could be 1 to 10, it could be 1 to 100. These are X-fold or C-fold steps. And then each step you would categorize it: a 1x, a 2x, a 3x, a 10x would be 1 part per 10 billion of the original substance. Clearly not toxic. Even
Clearly.
mercury at 1 part per 10 billion, which we're not big fans of mercury, it's not going to be problematic so much. But you could take that and keep going, and you could dilute beyond the number of Avogadro, and you're wondering, what are you diluting? Now it's pure energy. But in that context, he began to apply that to a lot of different things in nature. Rus toxicodendron, which is the Latin name for poison ivy. Poison ivy, we know it can cause itching, rashes, inflammation. It also can cause stiffness of the joints, people with that.
Mm-hmm.
So you found out that rust tox was a remedy for arthritis, for instance. And it was codified into materia medica, various things that were used around the world. They all spoke Latin as the name of the remedy so that everyone around the world who spoke different languages could identify the same remedy as the same remedy as the same remedy. And it spread like wildfire around the world. Homeopathy became a mainstay in the 19th century of medicine almost everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
and America included. And so that form of medicine was commonplace and set aside the other kind of doctoring. But we knew nothing of it in the 20th century if we were born into medical families. So that's the short version. And we have thousands of remedies today that are made from plant, animal, mineral, can be made from diseased tissue. There's all kinds of things you can use to make a homeopathic remedy, and they're always non-toxic and safe.
Right. I love homeopathy. It's made a huge difference in my family for sure. Um, can we kind of go back to like the government and, what it's trying to do with our medical freedom, our health freedom and stuff. What do you feel about the Maha movement?
Well, overall, it's a positive trend. It's a good
Hmm.
trend. How far will it go? I don't know. I mean, we have this desire to make the government do the right thing, but we know that our founding fathers said the government will never do the right thing. If you give them the power, they will abuse it. And so what we're dealing with now is how do we deal with the abusive, unconstitutional power of government? And as it relates to health and
Hmm.
healing, where our government agencies, we call it the administrative state, the bureaucratic oligarchy, are owned and controlled by the pharmaceutical industry, the manufacturers of pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, the defense industry, controlled by
Hmm.
what? Those who make the bombs and on and on it goes. So we have the conflicts of interest within our government and the centralizing of power, which always gives rise to industries that want to take advantage of that. I don't have to now buy off 50 different states. I got one federal government. I can
Right.
influence, control, put our people in place, bribe them, buy them off, promise them cushy positions. This is what we call a revolving door between CDC and the vaccine industry, for instance,
Right.
and things like that. And so, Kennedy comes in and he's aware of, as now Secretary of Health and Human Services, which is quite amazing.
Yeah.
He's aware that these agencies have become sock puppets for industry. And yet he goes in to head up the HHS, and boy, oh boy, does he even know how deep the rabbit hole goes, because there are people there that have been there for maybe generations now, for all we know, that still control things. And even like with the approval of the COVID vaccine recently, he was on vacation and two people were just like, yeah, we'll approve it. He's gone. They won't know. He fired him. So there's a
Yeah.
lot that we have to do. So part of the Maha movement is an awareness born of the overreach of big pharma during COVID.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and it's overreach of the pharma during lots of things, but
Mm.
specifically COVID, most recently. How do you feel, or how can we, with the first Trump administration, that's where the gene altering injection came from. That was kind of being pushed. And
Yeah.
then it went into the Biden administration. And then, of course, mayhem at that point in time. So, how can we
Yeah.
actually trust that this administration is going to really work on that freedom?
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's the old trust but verify scenario.
Right.
I mean, I have a lot of, let's say, high hopes of, I call it that, for Kennedy because of his track record.
Yeah.
He's a man of integrity. He knows where a lot of bodies are buried. He's sued the government and beaten them. And in that context, I believe he's sincere in his desire to make things better. At the
Right.
same time, he's entered into a position, even as the head guy of probably the most well-funded agency of all of them, billion-dollar budgets and controlling other billion-dollar agency budgets.
Yeah.
Uh, so we're dealing with something that is so, gosh, there's so many nefarious schemers involved, and it's so deeply entrenched into everything that if we think that because we got Kennedy there, it's going to solve everything, of course, one man can't do it alone.
Right.
We have to be very vocal and out front in our support of the good things he's trying to do, but also we have to be willing to push back against the things that are wrong. In fact, the Children's Health Defense, which he helped found,
Yeah.
he's no longer there, has sued him and as Secretary of an HHS because he's not implemented the requirement that the 1986 Act, the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program,
Hmm.
set that every 2 years you have to report to Congress. You have to on safety issues, vaccines, and make sure that because there's no liability that they're being made safer all of the time. And
Right.
Kennedy knows that. He was part of a suit against them because nobody else had done it either. When they found out, there was nobody reported to Congress that every 2 years is required by that law that was passed in '86. So now even CHD, which was his old organization, is suing him. So in that context, does it mean we hate Bobby Kennedy suddenly?
No.
No, it means he's in a situation where he needs help from the outside too to push
Right.
and make sure those things
Right.
that he can't be the only guy doing it. We're pushing it. We're pushing it too. So ultimately, though, I think we're going to have to decentralize all of that, take the power away from the federal government with these agencies that shouldn't even exist.
Right.
including by and large what the FDA does, which had good intentions with Harvey Wiley, the doc who started it with the Pure Food and Drug Act back in the early 20th century, which
Hmm.
was not long after co-opted and corrupted by industry. And he finally quit. He says, I can do better out here trying to teach people what's right. So to think you can go in and uncorrupt the inevitably corruptible, I think it's a bit naive, and our founders warned us against it. So I'm hopeful of because the consciousness has shifted to some degree. But if we're looking for the federal government to correct that, which it's by definition going to always corrupt, we are looking to fail. And so we must work locally and at the state level to push back where the federal government doesn't have the authority constitutionally. And that comes back to the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, which states that those powers not granted specifically or enumerated in the Constitution for the federal government belong to the states or the people respectively. And in that way, we can nullify a lot of that, which the federal government is doing and has done. But there have been very few governors willing to do that thus far. They tend to bootlick the federal government
Right.
and beg for scraps,
Yeah.
rather than defend their states. And because the senators, the two senators for each state that go to the Senate in Washington, D.C., are no longer selected by the legislatures of the states. They're popularly elected. Technically, the states have no standing and no representation. There was the People's House initially, and that was the House of Representatives voted on by the people in democratic
Yeah.
elections. And the Senate were appointed two people to represent the desires of the needs or the whatever of the state, right? So the
Hmm.
states had representation. They no longer do. And in that context, we've lost the state's willingness and ability to stand up to the federal government where it has no authority to do all that it does. So these are some of the things. We were involved with a documentary film. I was the host of that film called Utah Safe and Effective. And I think
Hmm.
it's still available for free. You could be able to watch it. It's
I
like
think it
Utah Safe and
is. Yeah.
Effective. And it goes, there's a lot that people already know now about the dangers of the vaccines, but toward the end of the film was really promoting some of these ideas of how do we correct what's gone wrong. And I hope that there are more films and documentaries and other media outlets that will promote genuine remedies, right? Because I always
Yeah.
ask, what's the rightful remedy? If you think the rightful remedy is to vote the bums out and put new good people in that become bums or are bought out or are compromised in any number of ways, that's what they want us to believe is just vote every 4 years, every 2 years, every 6 years. And the reality is we are, rapidly losing our capacity to even have a nation because of the largesse of government voting more powers,
Right.
voting to spend money it doesn't have and indebting and enslaving children not yet born to a debt that mathematically can't be repaid, on and on it goes. And so there I get into the economic imperative that we have to take our economic freedom back too, not just health freedom and medical freedom. And that is not to become wage and tax slaves because we're numbered like cattle in the field, like beasts in the field. And that means that no more numbering children like, as collateral for the debt. My kids don't have social security numbers. They don't have birth certificates. They're not collateral for that debt for
Right.
private bankers. But that's also a bridge too far for many to consider and conceive of, but not as much as before. I've heard people talking about this now. And all of this happened in the 20th century when we all went to sleep and our parents and our grandparents went to sleep. I'm not blaming them. They didn't know this is what was happening. And yet we are here bearing the brunt, and our kids and their kids bearing the brunt of something they had no, as far as we know, no knowledge of, no participation in. And I'm
Right.
trying to say, I want to do everything I can while I'm here so that they don't look back at me and go, Dad, why didn't you do something while
Why
you
didn't
had a
when do you
chance
work
to do
harder?
it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I don't know if you have any grandkids yet. We have a grandchild now and
Not
he's
yet.
6 months old. And,
Wow.
just looking at him and, he's not vaccinated. They had a home birth, he
Mm,
married a homeschool girl, like
nice.
all these amazing things. And so they're doing the right things. And so the fruit of the labor, right, goes on with our kids. And,
Mm.
they bought a farm and they're doing grass fed and
Oh,
pastured,
that's
and,
wonderful.
so much fun. And so I see that movement happening in, our kids' generation, which
Yes.
is beautiful. And, they still have a long road ahead of them. So, like, we can't give up as the parents and the grandparents. Like, we have to come alongside of them because I feel like our parents are like, we don't know what just happened.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, now
Yeah.
we know, and I think we have an obligation as stewards and mentors and elders in a sense. I hate to say that, but in that context to help bridge that gap.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not angry at the parents and grandparents. They didn't
No.
know. They were duped and deceived. And here we are. We have a wonderful opportunity to regain something that we lost. We thought we had, we didn't. It was lost before even we got here in Gen X.
Yeah.
And yet I feel I have a responsibility to do everything I can. I don't have delusions of grandeur. I'm not here to overturn things. And I realize revolution is often bloody and ends up in more tyranny. The rare revolution, like the American Revolution,
It doesn't usually happen.
that was a miracle in so many ways.
Yes.
And so I'm not engaged in going, I can't wait for them to, let's bring out the guns. Look, I'm a Second Amendment guy too. But the reality is, if we can do this peacefully, that's our first choice. Second and third, if I can. But if they make it impossible that any other way, that's what's left. That's in the Declaration of Independence. And we got to recognize maybe the kids that are coming through and their kids are coming through to set the stage for something. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's definitely a challenge that they're here for. And as long as we can maintain our presence here, I'm going to try. I believe in the sanctity of life. And although
Hmm.
I also know that the immortality of soul exists far beyond this body, but it
Right.
doesn't mean I don't appreciate this body. I'm going to try to help it stick around as long as possible. So we have an opportunity to do something that our parents and grandparents' generation didn't think they needed to do. The illusion of freedom. We are
Yeah.
not under the illusion that we're free. We've seen how not free we are. And
Yeah.
so talking with these kids and those next kids generation and engaging with them and sharing these stories as opposed to turning these kids over to government indoctrination centers for them to be completely ignorant, like I
Hmm.
admittedly was about so many things,
Oh my
some of
goodness, me
which
too.
some of which we covered in a rapid way today with you on this pod, which is amazing. And it may open some eyes and hearts and minds to see, oh my gosh, life is a little messier than I thought. But then again, once you know that, you're like, oh, now that I know how this happened, I can start unwinding it and actually not be, I can't do anything. I'm powerless. No, you're empowered to do this, but not if you are ignorant of all that preceded.
Right, right. That's our responsibility is to stay educated and to,
Mhm.
find out what really are our freedoms. I know Iowa is different than Ohio and California and everything, but learn your local legislature,
Mhm.
understand the laws in your state and, stand up for those things for sure. Because that's where the difference definitely comes from. And it starts in our home. I have a lot of
Yes.
mamas that listen to this podcast, and it starts right here. So if you can change the mom and they understand more of what's going on and understand the
Yeah.
history and the options that we have,
Mhm.
then a whole society changes, I think is when,
Definitely.
yeah, for sure.
The thing that, like, raising my kids the way I have, they were all organic, right? We ate
Hmm.
organic food. And people would ask, how come your kids are staying organic through their teenage years or when they're away from your home and stuff? And I was like, well, look, I told my kids that they were going to be invited to their friends' houses that don't eat the way we do. I'm like,
Yeah.
you can try their food. It's okay, but I want you to pay attention to how your body reacts and
Yep.
responds because it won't lie. And you just tell me, and when you feel a tummy ache or a headache or you throw up, I want you to know that's not because you got sick. It's because you're healthy. Your body rejected that. And so my kids, when they had that experience, which inevitably they were going to, they came home and they're like, "Oh my gosh, you were right, Dad." I didn't have to tell them again. And
No,
so when they
my
were,
kids too, they're like, I am not eating that again.
well, yeah, when you're offered food, and my kid, my daughter at 4 years of age would ask, "Is that organic?" And they'd be like, "What?" And they would say, "Yes, it is." And she'd say, "Let me see the label," because she could read the word organic before she could spell cat. You
Right?
know, and so in that context, when parents ask the question, "How do you get your kids to fill in the blank?" Well, they'll only do it because that's the way you live. They
Right.
know if you're a hypocrite. They know if you're like, "We eat organic, but not on the weekends." Like, what is that?
Yeah.
Right? You're
Yeah.
committed to a lifestyle and you want your kids to commit to it, but you're not committed to it. They witness that. Remember the old drug commercial, the PSA? Where'd you learn to take drugs? I learned it from you, Dad.
Right.
They watch you. They're
They
they're very
totally do.
observant. So
Yeah.
that's the answer. Do you live that way, or do you
Hmm.
just tell them to live that way and you don't? They know.
Yeah. Well, I just took my daughter on a trip because she's 18 and we did a girls' trip and I took her to California to the ocean and we did a horse thingy and whatever. And we walk into the Airbnb, which was super cute, like right off the ocean. And she goes, Mom, you've ruined me. I said, What do you mean? She goes, We're in this gorgeous Airbnb. It's right by the ocean. And what's the first thing I think of when I walk into my room? Oh, I better unplug that TV. She goes,
That's
not like,
great.
oh, good, that bed looks really comfy. She's like,
Yeah.
nope. What do we have for electronics in the room?
Well, I have to say you are an awesome mom. I'm so grateful to connect with you and share what we're doing here, much less whatever else you're doing when I'm not here. It's got to be great. So
It's
this is
so
awesome.
much fun. I love
Yeah.
it. I love it. Thank you so much for being with me today. I appreciate you taking the time to be on the podcast. I know our my listeners have really appreciated you.
Well, and you'll have to tell me how I can help share this because I love what you're doing. And
Yep.
if I can help in any way, this is what we must do for each other now.
Absolutely. We'll send you all that information. And for all of you listening, make sure you like, subscribe, and share, and leave a review for this podcast. And God bless each and every one of you. And I will see you in the next episode.